Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another ASCE live stream. Yes, this is preview number 2 for the 2025 ASCE convention. My name is Brad Keeler. I'm the director of the Geo Institute at ASCE and the head of the conferences team, which is why I am your guide to the ASCE convention. If you don't know anything about ASCE, I always question how you made it here, why you're here, but thank you for coming. After you watch this fine programming today, you should pick your favorite electronic device with an internet connection and head over to asce.org. And there you will find out many things about our institution, including that we have over 160,000 members. We have 9 institutes in technical specialty areas. When you join ASCE, you get to choose one of those institutes and join it for free. And I would encourage you to do that. You can also find out all kinds of other great things about our technical program, student activities, and a lot more. We always have a lot going on at ASCE. If you like what you see today, and I feel very strongly that you will, you should, of course, click like, subscribe, and get notifications. And if you do those things, we will let you know, dear viewers, every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Of course, this is a sneak preview of the ASCE 2025 convention. This is not content that will be presented there, but it is like the content that you may see at that fine event coming up in October. And here to tell you more about that, about himself, and to introduce today's speakers, all the way from New York City, where he works at Langen, and he is a GI member. I will get that in as well. It is Art Alzamora. Art, thank you for doing this.
Great. Thank you, Brad. And as Brad mentioned, my name is Art Alzamora. I'm a principal geotechnical engineer with Langen in New York City. I've been a member of the convention committee in some capacity for well over the last decade. And today I'm joined by Tyler Stevens and Jessica Randolph, and like to tell you a little bit more about our sneak peek event. So our sneak peek event today is for the habitat restoration in Western Washington and showcases the work completed by Shannon Wilson. Shannon Wilson is an employee-owned consulting firm headquartered in Seattle, Washington. The firm was founded in 1954 by William L. Shannon and Stanley D. Wilson. The firm has grown to more than 300 employees and 14 offices nationwide. Shannon Wilson is committed to technical excellence and high-quality service by providing integrated geotechnical engineering geology, environmental, and natural resource services for clients worldwide. Joining me today from Shannon Wilson is Vice President Tyler Stevens and Senior Geotechnical Engineer Jessica Randolph. A little bit more about Jessica. She is a geotechnical engineer with 11 years of experience working on roadway infrastructure, culvert levee, and ecological restoration projects. Jessica joined Shannon Wilson in 2019 after 5 years of geotechnical engineering work in Los Angeles. Jessica's responsibilities include developing project scopes and budgets, performing engineering feasibility and design analysis, preparing reports, plans, specifications, and providing construction support. Her technical experience includes soil characterization, deep and shallow foundation design, slope stability analysis, settlement evaluation, liquefaction evaluation, and geotechnical report preparation. Jessica holds a master's and bachelor's degrees from UCLA and is registered professional engineer in Washington and California. Joining Jessica today is Tyler. Tyler is a geotechnical engineer with more than 25 years of experience in railroad geotechnical design, including embankment and slope stability improvement measures, track roadbed design, yard and intermodal facility design and bridge design. Tyler's experience includes landslide, field reconnaissance, subsurface exploration, instrumentation, stability analysis, and stability improvement design. Tyler has managed projects and observed construction of stability improvement measures for numerous sites throughout the United States, as well as served as a project engineer and project manager on a wide range of geotechnical projects for the railroad industry. Tyler holds a master's from the University of Washington and a bachelor's from the University of Idaho and registered professional engineer in Washington. I will now turn over to Tyler and Jessica, and you guys can take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Art. I'll start with a brief intro of the two case histories that we're going to present to you all today. Habitat restoration in Western Washington. As kind of a intro, the state of Washington was involved in a lawsuit some time ago that resulted in the requirement for them to improve or undo some habitat fish passage impediments that were caused or are caused by infrastructure dating back to turn of the century in some cases. So these two case histories are somewhat related to that lawsuit and legal actions. They are approaching or attempting to remedy the same fish passage impediments and habitat impediments, but they are vastly different projects by different ownership and in different settings. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica to talk about the Lower Dungeness River Floodplain Restoration Project. And then later on, I'll talk about the Meadowdale project.
Okay, thanks, Tyler. Got control here. Let me see if I can flip on through. Sorry, guys. There we go. Okay, let's skip forward to my slides here. A couple of the money shots, just for fun. These are the good ones. Okay, so the Lower Dungeness River Floodplain Restoration and Levee Realignment Project. So this is the project that I'll cover today, and then Tyler's got a separate job as well that are under that habitat restoration theme in Western Washington. And this project was for Clallam County, specifically the Department of Community Development, and a lot of involvement from their Public Works Department as well. Shannon Wilson was the prime for both the design and then construction management phases of the project that were pretty extensive in duration, 2016 all the way up to end of 2024, just this past year. The project is located over here. It's a little small in this inset, but it is over on the Olympic Peninsula in Western Washington, and just on the kind of very north end here against the Dungeness Bay. So the project location here is highlighted in red, and across from the sound from Seattle. I've got highlighted here a very extensive list of our project partners, funding partners, design team, and contractors. As you can imagine, very much a multidisciplinary project over this time duration. So I won't go through everybody, but very much a multidisciplinary team that we were pulling together to get the job done. See if I can click through here. Use this. There we go. Okay, so some of the project goals here that are often somewhat similar to our habitat restoration projects are reconnection of the floodplain to the Dungeness River. So the Dungeness River, you can see on this map, runs from the south up to the north, exits into the Dungeness Bay right here, and also habitat restoration as a whole within that area. Another goal is improving flood protection and also drainage infrastructure for within the project area and then downstream as well. So we'll talk a little bit about the project elements that went into meeting these goals. So on the right here, I've got an image of the project site, and I've kind of drawn in various elements that we'll talk through. And first and foremost, you can see the Dungeness River running from the south roughly up to the north here. You have to use your imagination a little bit. This image is a post-project construction. So use your imagination a bit in that the main stem of the Dungeness River runs along the left side of this purple line, which was the Dungeness levee that was removed as part of this project. So this was a core levee that was built in the 60s and constrained the Dungeness River along the left side of that purple line that I've drawn in. So that levee was removed as part of the project and set back to the green and red alignments along the sides of the page here. So this was 6,000 feet roughly of new setback levee along the town road levee in green and the north levee in red. So those tied together to various existing points on the project site, including on the south end of the project. You can see where it's labeled River's Edge Levee. So this is an adjacent project from the Jamestown Slalom tribe that was also setting back the Dungeness levee, the old Dungeness levee that continued off of the page to the south here. And they constructed a setback levee as well with a lot of the same project goals and benefits. And so we tied in directly with that levee at that connection point there. So very much also tying in with a lot of local project partners and parallel work. We'll talk a little bit about that later as well. So in yellow is another element of the project is a Old Town Road. So this road ran right in the middle of our new anticipated floodplain area. And as part of this project, that old road was removed and it was relocated onto the top of the levee, onto the top of Town Road levee in green there. That's another element that we will look at a bit more. Okay. So this opened up, I've kind of highlighted here the area of floodplain reconnection and habitat restoration that was targeted for this project. It's about 110 acres of area that's shown in blue, specific to the county's project. And also included, you can kind of see underneath that, highlighting new starts of side channels and also flood return channels that were cut into the floodplain to help facilitate the floodplain reactivation and then also floodplain drainage after a flood event. These images, courtesy of the county, just show a bit of a different view looking out toward the Dungeness Bay, a before and after of the project. So you can see the Dungeness River in its condition, and then where the levee was, kind of right up next to it, that 1964 levee label there on the left, and the previous town road. And then you can see on the right where we've opened up that middle area, kind of new channels flowing through the middle and set everything back. So just kind of a unique look at what the surrounding area looks like as well for around this project. I'll go through a couple more of these elements in a bit more detail with some photos that are always great to paint a picture here. So the town road that I mentioned in yellow on the right that was removed and then set back on top of the town road levee. That whole road was dug out, removed from the floodplain so that the floodplain could act in whatever form and shape that it wanted to take. This has become, on the left, you can see a reconnected floodplain area, a really successful. And you can see some of like the wood that was placed out there, but a lot of what was town road, old town road, has become new channels that are cutting their way through as the floodplain develops over time. And then the orange is a flood return channel that was cut as part of the project for drainage after a flood event, kind of tying back into the main stem of the Dungeness River, where it then goes underneath the East Anderson Road Bridge that's at the top of our image on the right. And this has, taken on a life of its own in a really great way, which is exactly what we want to see. This is an image from, post-construction after you've got some good vegetation development within that floodplain area, and it looks, different today than it looked a year ago, and on and on. Okay, a few more elements here that I've highlighted on the right in the purple circles are some engineered log jams that were installed along the existing Dungeness River, kind of in the footprint of where the old levee was removed. And these serve to slow the river migration instead of having the main stem of the river just jump over potentially. These kind of help slow that river migration so that it's happening over time. You can see in these log structures that in this case, you can kind of see in the image chained together. In that footprint that they're sitting on is the old levee where it was removed from its original location. And then in orange, we have a couple of elements where we're tying in between the levee to the surrounding area. So for example, in the two orange boxes, the one on the right is tying into East Anderson Road. We have an MSE wall, mechanically stabilized earth wall that crosses over a creek, Meadowbrook Creek. And so you can see a culvert at the bottom, kind of through and under the MSE wall. That is a fish friendly, as Tyler talked about, one of the main goals of the project. So there's a fish friendly culvert, and these are geogrid reinforced MSE walls that then have a vegetated face covering. So you can kind of see that vegetation starting to be established in the photo. This is during construction with that temporary fall protection and such. So that is it looks different today than it did back then, continuing to evolve. But this connects to Town Road there across the creek, as I mentioned, and then the other MSE wall on the in the middle of the levee there connects to a private residence, but very similar construction with a smaller culvert running through it, through where a ditch is located. Okay. And we'll talk a bit more about this later and how we got to the final configuration of Town Road, but I've just added some photos here of the connection points and the road itself on top of the Town Road levee. And so the left picture is that connection over the MSE wall between the levee itself and connecting to East Anderson Road. And then the bottom picture is the final configuration on opening day of Town Road on top of the levee. There are 2 lanes and the pedestrian trail off to the side. So really covering a lot of ground with different options for folks to cross through this area, whether that be vehicular or pedestrian, bikes, etc. That's our final configuration. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on a couple of geotechnical design items because that's mostly my area, and we'll spend a few minutes there, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the construction kind of challenges and lessons learned. So we did a couple of phases of subsurface exploration programs on the geotechnical front. So as you can see, this map on the right is kind of dotted with a lot of different explorations, both historical and then done as part of our efforts. So this included borings, hand borings, pavement borings through the old Town Road, CPTs, test pits in the old levee, and then associated laboratory testing that was done to classify those soils, test their strength, etc. And so this was a couple of phases of explorations as alignments shifted and such, but I'm really trying to get a good understanding of what was beneath the levee footprint, what the old levee was made of, what was underneath the old road. So a lot of things to classify and figure out that would inform our design. And some of the analyses and challenges that we needed to meet on the geotechnical front. So the levee footprint is underlain by very soft silt and clay for the most part. And so this has settlement concerns and then also bearing capacity issues if built too quickly. And so some of the different things that we looked at was pretty in-depth settlement analysis and ended up overbuilding the levees because we want to make sure that we're accounting for the long-term future settlement over the design life of the levee and making sure that we maintain the desired level of flood protection in the long term. So those need to account for settlement so that we don't end up settling below our design heights for the levees themselves. We also, as I mentioned, that kind of bearing capacity issue, we limited the rate of construction that the contractor could do. So they could build 5 feet initially for the levees, and then a waiting period of a week, and then 1 foot per week after that point. So limiting the rate of construction so that we didn't have a shearing failure beneath the levees during the construction process if they were built up too quickly. And then we looked to the right are just a couple of snippets of seepage analyses and slope stability analyses per the Army Corps guidelines that we looked at and helped inform some of the items on this next slide. This was our levee typical section that I've kind of annotated here with some different colors. And I'll highlight a few of the items that were informed by our analyses. So the levee fill specification was based on local pit availability. What was in the area, we went out and did some sampling and testing to figure out what was available in the general proximity of the project. And then that informed our levee fill gradation. In red here, I've highlighted we had a base reinforcement geogrid product. And so that was included for stability purposes and allowed us to use steepened side slopes. So basically the steeper that we could get those side slopes while still maintaining the levee crest height or crest width that we needed allowed for minimizing our wetland impacts. So this is being constructed in wetland areas. And so if we can steepen those side slopes, we can minimize our wetland impacts, which is a real benefit to the project. So that base geogrid reinforcement layer was placed beneath the levee after the clearing grub. We also have on the left slope reinforcement geogrids on the riverward side, and those are to keep that steepened slope stable during a flood condition. So you can see those on the left spaced out through the riverward slope. And then on the landward side, at the toe of the levee, we have a horizontal drainage filter or drainage blanket layer and filter layer. So that drainage blanket layer draws down the seepage water so that it, in a flood event, is pulled down to that toe area and can exit out the levee toe instead of exiting out the slope face during a flood event. And then the filter layer was designed around it to make sure that the drainage layer stayed clean, stayed functional. We didn't have fines and material migrating into that drainage layer and inhibiting its performance. Those are just a couple of the elements informed by our analyses. Okay, I'll spend a few minutes on some of the construction specifics, and I've tried to highlight a few challenges, some of which are common to lots of the different projects that I'm sure everyone on here has faced in different ways. And then some of our solutions, lessons learned, just the process that we went through. Of course, there are many more over these large projects over time with many players involved, many stakeholders, but I've just picked a couple of them to speak to today. So the first one being, as I mentioned, we are tying in and working in parallel with a project just upstream of ours. So that River's Edge levee setback project that's happening in parallel, but with its own sponsors, with its own grant funding. And we are literally tying the two levees together. So of course, it's not just two things that happen independently. It warrants and necessitates frequent, consistent communication across the board. We're supporting the county. The county's communicating across with the tribe to make sure that we are figuring out what it looks like for us to tie into their levee that they have designed and constructed, items like that. And it also comes into play in my next couple of challenges as well. So I'll flip over to those. We found ourselves in a circumstance that kind of ties with challenge number one, I would say, and the original intent of this project and the sequencing of it was that we would construct in a phase one most of the levees, and then in order to allow some of the settlement to occur in that first year, we would have a phase two of construction. And in that interim time, the old town road would remain open. And so these areas that I've clouded on the map would not be constructed yet. And those would happen in a phase two of the project, where we would then close the road, construct those tie-ins, and complete the project. That was the original intent. However, as we all know, delays to construction, whether that be weather or anything else, they happen. And we found ourselves in a circumstance where the bid for that phase two work came in higher than could be accepted. And so a couple of things like that ended up in delays. And we found ourselves approaching flood season in the fall with an incomplete levee. So my little tagline of levees don't work well with large holes in them really came into play. And so we found ourselves concerned because upstream of our project, the levee had already been breached ahead of the county's schedule. So the county's job site, let alone anything downstream, was not prepared for the flood season to come, where you would have floodwaters that would be entering directly into this construction site and then continuing on. So we kicked off a couple of things in parallel, one of which being contingency planning. So we looked at lots of different options here to try to figure out what are we going to do if the work can't be completed in time. So we looked at a couple of things. I won't go into detail: temporary levees, super sack, aqua dams, et cetera, trying to look at kind of blocking off that area between the old levee that was still in place and then the new levee where we had this opening. And in parallel, we were working to complete the work that was needed with the phase 1 existing contractor. So luckily, the phase 2 work was added to the phase 1 work via change order, and we didn't end up needing the contingency planning. But just it underscores the importance of communication and adaptability for our clients, supporting them through this process and looking at options. Okay, the last item I'll point to is, the original design for the top of this road was a 2-lane road on top of the levee, but throughout the construction process, there was a robust public involvement with competing priorities, road only, trail only, combination thereof. And the county led a public outreach and communication effort. And this just underscores, needing to be adaptable in our design. We were able to fit 2 lanes and a mostly 6-foot pedestrian trail on the top of the levee with a curb to separate. And just a reminder for all of us looking for opportunities to provide value to our clients. Okay, my last element here is, this was really a habitat restoration success story. I've got some specifics here about some of the elements that come into play that help support, woody materials slows water velocity for spawning and rearing habitat, revegetation, reducing river temperatures, et cetera. This job had 24 acres of wetland creation and 51 acres of wetland rehabilitation, and then lots of planting done by the county to help facilitate this habitat restoration. So really a success story all around, and just kind of a quick summary about our involvement and some of the project elements. Okay, I'll kick it over to Tyler then.
Thanks, Jessica. Picked a great time for the battery in my mouse to die. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the Meadowdale Beach Park project. This is up in Edmonds, just north of the city. The site history is kind of central to the project challenges here from a geotechnical and construction standpoint. I'll go through a bit of that, walk through some of the geologic and conceptual studies that we undertook early in the project, then the more detailed geotechnical explorations and design, which included some historical research that was a bit unique to this project, and then the BNSF bridge construction. So this project involved a twin railroad bridges to replace an undersized culvert was the primary focus of the project to restore habitat. I've got a short video, time-lapse video of that bridge construction we can go into a little bit later as well, as we get into the project. So we're here just north of the city, just on the north edge of Edmonds, in a developed ravine, Lund's Gulch Ravine, with non-ADA access up on the plateau to the east and an ADA access point closer to the beach as shown here. This is the ADA access road shown with our site and exploration plan, highlighting several of the project elements. There were 3 and ultimately 4 locations along the access route that required stability improvements to allow for construction equipment, loading, and all the material import and export for the project. There's a new restroom enclosure down along the pathway here, a new pedestrian bridge across Lund's Gulch as highlighted in this location, and then a BNSF bridge as highlighted here. The interior, the park interior in this location, generally speaking, was subject to an estuary restoration, restoring a pocket estuary that had historically been there before the area was developed. Here's a bit of a highlight showing the railroad bridge and some of the design depictions of the features that were just highlighted in the previous slide, with the estuary shown here. So why was this project necessary? This is a picture from the outlet side of the culvert that had served as the passageway for Lund's Gulch Creek to flow beneath the BNSF railroad embankment shown here. Twin main tracks, a very high volume corridor, the main freight corridor through the area for BNSF Railway. This culvert also served as the primary pedestrian access point for the Meadowdale Beach, which is in the background or behind us in the photo here. What you see here is this very narrow ledge along what's ultimately the south side of that culvert structure was the primary pedestrian access from the park side to the beach side. This is not necessarily a high flow condition, but nonetheless, the walkway was underwater at the time this photo was taken. So during the wet winter season, flooding conditions, sediment would get deposited within the culvert and cause it to flood even worse. Pedestrians were it was not really a feasible access route for pedestrians to get out to the beach, which necessitated or caused a lot of trespassing up and over the embankment across the BNSF tracks, which is an obvious safety concern. So there were a lot of stakeholders involved here, and there were a lot of drivers for the project. There was the habitat restoration, pedestrian safety, improved beach access, a list of reasons why this project had a lot of support from a lot of different entities. A few shots here of what the park was before construction. This is the previous restaurant enclosure. The BNSF embankment is just to the right of the frame over here. In the background here is the previous picnic shelter, grassy lawn area that largely became the estuary, as we'll see in some later shots. Here's another shot looking up the valley. Lund's Gulch Creek being to the left of the frame here. This structure in the distance is the ranger's residence. At least at that time, Meadowdale Beach Park had a full-time ranger on staff to help with park tours for school children and things of that type. Site history. So Meadowdale was historically a rail stop back, way back when, turn of the century, when they first developed the rail line through to the area. No photos of that time period, of course, but some older photos, oblique photos showing the area was formerly a country club. The Meadowdale Country Club existed on the site. So here's a shot showing the primary country club structure. And down here, it's a little bit foggy, but you can see there's a pool and a pool house structure there that comes into play as far as construction. Here's another shot looking down the slope toward the pool house and pool structure. During design, there was speculation that or indication that the pool had never been fully demolished and removed, but had instead been just filled with debris during demolition and covered over with soil, which turned out to be true and was a driver for part of our subsurface investigation program. Here's another shot from 1977 showing that the main country club structure had been demolished, as well as the pool structure had been demolished and covered over. What I'll also point out in this shot is that the culvert that passes, the Lund's Gulch Creek passes through beneath the railway embankment. The outlet channel from the culvert is more or less a straight line to the beach, which is not necessarily a natural flow path, and certainly was not conducive to fish spawning and habitat, especially during high flow conditions. The restriction that the culvert caused was a hydraulic, increased the velocities and really caused problems as far as fish passage was concerned during high flow events. So another reason to take a look at replacing this culvert structure. So early on, 2015, we started looking at the feasibility of this project, looking at what options might be feasible or constructible for improving the fish passage, replacing that culvert. We looked at tunnel options. We looked at a variety of different options, ultimately landing on a bridge. We also looked at the sediment loading conditions in the system, landsliding and other mass wasting processes upstream from the culvert to characterize the sediment loading and what's it going to take to allow sediment to pass through the system. And then we looked again at the preliminary geotechnical assessment, just looking at what might be feasible for a tunnel, bridge, etc. A couple of earlier studies, and then our geotechnical analysis kicked off a couple of years later with a subsurface exploration plan and the design analyses. So as I showed previously, we did a series of borings along the access road as well as a few down within the park proper for the pedestrian bridge and railroad bridge design studies. What's shown also here, this kind of grid pattern in the pinkish color, is a series of closely spaced ground penetrating radar transects that we conducted through the park area, as well as some similar transects up along the rail embankment. So we were focused on looking for the buried pool structure or any other buried elements, obstructions from the demolition, the country club demolition. And in the rail embankment, it was well known that the original construction was a single main track, which was main 2 on the landward side, followed closely after by the construction of the second track, increasing the embankment width out on the waterward side to build the second main line. What we didn't know and didn't have accurate records of was what existed along the seaward side of main 2 before they put that second embankment out on the waterward side. Primary concern was, did they bury a bunch of riprap or other seawall type structure between those two tracks? That would be something we would have to contend with as far as the bridge construction was concerned. So those were the primary focuses of our explorations outside of the drilling to understand and characterize the subsurface conditions. The GPR transects down through the park area are shown in more detail here with some different color coding where the GPR interpretation identified shallow, less than 4 feet deep anomalies, and then deeper anomalies greater than 4 feet or 5 feet in depth. So it's kind of a shotgun blast, not a lot of clarity there. We did dig some test pits to confirm and did encounter in one of the test pits confirmation that the pool structure had in fact been buried. Excuse me. A couple of the transects along the railway embankment showed we did not see anomalies that would suggest a buried trestle, which was another concern. It was common practice to build trestles across such drainages way back in the original construction period. We saw no indications of a buried trestle structure. We did not also see any indications of buried rock or riprap. One anomaly that was interpreted here was the subject of a sub-horizontal boring. We drilled through the embankment to evaluate whether there was anything buried along the outward edge of the original embankment. Also included in that exploration was this electrical resistivity tomography to look for other anomalous conditions. Nothing that jumped out at the geophysics interpretation there. So one kind of unusual and interesting piece of our program was we contacted the Great Northern Railway Historical Society, which frankly I didn't know even existed before this project. But there's at that time, and I think they still exist, a group of rail enthusiasts who have collected a bunch of the construction records and historical records from the Great Northern Railway, which was then became part of what is now BNSF Railway. Old construction records, a bunch of old historical artifacts that they maintain, including the original design drawings, a bunch of the as-built records from when the rail lines were built, record of the cost and details of the construction and when it occurred. So these folks were very, very helpful in providing for us records of the specifics from construction through this specific area that we used, I guess, to try to understand or confirm whether there may be some buried structure, timber trestle or riprap, seawall, what have you. There was record of several different types of embankment construction when the original line was built, a couple of which would have been problematic in terms of driving pile or putting shoring between the two tracks. One of the documents that the Historical Society produced is shown here. The cover is shown here, which is specific to construction of the second main line between Seattle and Everett. There was nothing in this document that would have concluded or confirmed the presence of anything buried at this specific site. We also looked at the as-built blueprint drawings that they provided scans of. An example of which is shown here. This is actually the site. So we're at milepost 22 is just north of our site. The area highlighted here is the reach through the Meadowdale Park area. And this note here was about the most conclusive information we found about what might be buried in this embankment. And it says existing slope wall completed. We had to interpret a bit of what that means, but it didn't mention anything about seawall or riprap or timber cribbing, any of the problematic features that we were concerned about. As I mentioned earlier, we drilled a sub-horizontal boring through the embankment at that approximate location. The intent being if there was a buried riprap blanket or armoring along the original embankment, as shown here on the right, that boring would have encountered something hard and difficult to drill through, which we did not encounter. So putting all of that information together, we concluded that there's likely not anything systematic, anything buried in the embankment that would cause problems for construction. Of course, there's always the potential for obstructions of any kind when you're working with embankments and geologic materials, but nothing that we could find here from our investigation. So the BNSF bridge construction was one of the more interesting, at least to me, parts of this project. You can see here a dedicated pedestrian path over along the south side. This is a elevation view looking to the east. So a dedicated pedestrian pathway over on the south end of the bridge, 5-span bridge to accommodate the stream channel and allow for natural channel migration and other processes and reconnecting to the pocket estuary. The bridge was built in 2 phases. So each half of the bridge, the main 2 bridge and then the main 1 bridge were built during, each bridge was built in its entirety during a 24-hour closure, single track closure, meaning that we had to maintain live track conditions on the other track that was left open. So that necessitated shoring between the 2 tracks to support the live track, the open track, while the bridge under construction, they excavated to expose the piling and put the pile caps and bridge girders and other features together. So two halves of the bridge construction each occurred during a different 24-hour window. All the H-pile were driven in advance through the existing embankment, followed by the first 24-hour closure to dig out and build the first bridge, and then repeat the process for the second. What's shown here is the concept that was included in the design drawings for shoring for the track that was to remain open. This depicts a back-to-back sheet pile wall with a tie rod between. The shoring design was left up to the contractor to finalize and select the shoring of their preference. They ultimately elected to go with a sheet pile system, similar to what was shown here. So I have a quick video to share here. Shown here are some of the designers and other team members. Snohomish County Parks was ultimately the sponsor and owner for the project. Contractor and other designers are shown here. This video is available on YouTube as well, but play it through here. Time-lapse video showing the two bridges constructed. Placing the shoring between tracks, doing some pre-cutting for the culvert removal. And then the 24-hour window begins by excavating out parts of the embankment, exposing the shoring pile caps, setting the structure. BNSF crews performed all of the construction. They are a well-oiled machine when it comes to building these bridges. They had all of the movements choreographed almost down to the minute. It was something to see. So the second bridge closure comes in, remove the shoring, dig out for the pile caps and bridge elements on the waterward side, and then build the bridge back. So then once both tracks were reopened to rail traffic, the contractor turned their attention to excavating everything beneath the bridge, keeping the bypass in place until the outlet channel had been constructed and was ready to resume flow, and then finishing out the connection and the estuary and ultimately the pedestrian path to the left of the frame here. You can see the outlet channel curves to the right of the frame here, northward, rather than shooting out straight out to the water across the beach. They dug a channel to the north to flatten the gradient, and the biologists tell me to help fish passage a little more, less current, easier for the fish to swim upstream and get into the estuary for protection. So here's the finished product, showing from the outlet side, the pocket estuary here, pedestrian path also shown, and the rail bridge. I've been told that this construction, I know the construction was completed in June, and early during the fish migration window, a month or so later, there were fish returning to the system. So by all accounts, a very successful project. Some still shots of the same that were shown in the video. And with that, I'll wrap it up and we can open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Tyler. And it was and Jessica, thank you both. This was pretty remarkable presentations, pretty remarkable feats that you pulled off. So I'm going to remind everyone that's tuned in right now, if you could please populate any questions you may have. They will then pass them on to me in the chat, and I can pass them along to Tyler and Jessica. I'll start with the first question. Maybe both of you could take a shot at this. What were the sources of funding for these projects?
For the Meadowdale project, Snohomish County was the primary project sponsor. It's their park facility, so they had the primary interest in building the project. They, through some of their partner organizations, applied for and secured grant funding. That includes local, state, and federal grants, and that was from a variety of sources that I can't name in their entirety, but it was largely grant funded with almost equal part Snohomish County funding.
It's great. Jessica, the other project?
Yeah, so for the Dungeness Levee project, primarily state of Washington grant funding, Department of Ecology, Floodplains by Design, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, a couple more, but primarily grant funded, a little bit of contribution from the county, but grant funding. They were really successful at funding a lot of this work, including some of the additions as time went on. Surprises and additions, getting additional grant funding. The county was really successful with that.
That's great. That's great. Tyler, I had a personal question just from looking at it. I was looking at the railway construction that you had. I saw was those piles part of the project for the railway's support, or were they already existing? And I was a little, when you showed your time lapse, I saw some cranes in there, but I wasn't seeing some pile construction. I was curious, did that include, besides the sheet piling, was there some pile installations as well?
Yeah, the railroad crews drove all of the bridge piling in advance through the existing embankment, and that wasn't part of the time lapse. You're correct; those were installed before the time lapse started.
And would you mind, like, maybe I saw there were some. Was that part of your design and scope as well? The piles, I saw some batter piles and work in there. I assume that was part of your work as well.
Correct. As far as the geotechnical involvement, we estimated the capacities and helped the structural folks spec the pile lengths for everything. And the battered piles were part of the structural design for seismic purposes.
Okay. So I have another question. How quickly did the project see the intended benefits for habitat and fish, or how they quickly returned to the river and floodplain?
I mentioned that shortly as the construction for Meadowdale wrapped up in June of 2023, actually substantial completion in June of 2022. And my understanding is July, August of that year, they saw fish returning to the system. So it was pretty immediate.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think similarly for Dungeness, we had a couple rounds of construction, couple rounds of substantial completion, you would say, for phasing, but it was also very quick to get, like in some of those pictures that I was showing where the road was removed and you can see where the floodplain restoration has happened. It was very fast, and associated with that as well, seeing salmon back in the system, for just as an example, among other wildlife, really quickly coming into play. That first year was pretty remarkable. We were all still, around and on site and involved in the job, and even just in that first year, pretty significant.
Wow, that's I guess nature's pretty resilient and persistent. This one might be more for you, Jessica. I saw in one of the roadway or some of the pedestrian paths that were being built on the levee, you had mentioned there was like competing priorities from the public. were these public groups that essentially that were together that they were competing against? Were these individual folks that were just in opposition or had different ideas? I guess I mean was there any sort of specialty groups, or I'm thinking of like was there a running club or a bike group that were just very insistent on making the pathways certain ways? If you wouldn't mind like elaborating a little bit.
Sure. I would say the answer is all of the above.
That's what I expected.
Yeah, absolutely. It was individuals, definitely some specific groups, some specific groups formed just in relation to the project itself, and so yeah, a combination of everyone. But the county really dug into this kind of public process and fielded robust involvement and really trying to put our heads together on the county side of things, trying to meet the various goals to the best of everyone's ability, and then for us on the design side, trying to do the same. Redesign, kind of working fast and figuring out what could meet as much of the benefit as possible. And at the end of the day, we ended up with a project that covered a bit of a compromise, I suppose, but it was still a 2-lane road, and then added in, part of what wasn't in the original design, that pedestrian trail connections that the public has really been a fan of. There's lots of people out there riding bikes, walking dogs, etc.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of funny. I don't remember in undergraduate or graduate school any of us taking classes and keeping the public happy, unfortunately, right? That's great. I do have a question, a separate sort of thought here. So I mentioned to start the event, I sit on the East Coast. Obviously, we in New York, we do have 4 seasons, which some parts of the country do not have 4 distinct seasons. But I would imagine, in the Pacific Northwest, how does climate impact a lot of the work you did? Obviously, we were seeing from the time-lapse video with tides and things like that. But, these type of projects, cooler weather is, stuff that we might not see in the Southeast. Would you mind maybe, Tyler, elaborate a little bit, or Jessica?
Sure, I'll go. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we have to be very mindful of the wet season. Jokingly, that's July 7th through July 3rd, with 2 dry days in between. But the wet season, October through March, even into May, you just have to be mindful that there's always potential for rain and sometimes pretty intense rain events. And so all of our construction specifications and geotechnical reports include provisions for wet season work conditions and requirements. It's workable, but it's more effort to do the site prep things and keep things buttoned up and drained and dried up for continued earthwork, in particular through the wet season.
And Jessica, what are your thoughts on weather impacts? Is it similar to Tyler?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely, front of mind, and, for the Dungeness project specifically, like I was talking about, we started looking at, we're approaching flood season, and, getting flood risk concerns. And some of that is, like he was saying, you're entering October, et cetera, and needing to really, consider potential contingency plans, hopefully not, but, yeah, and just, but in every project, that's a big element, is making sure that we figure out how to get the work done as needed outside of the summer season.
Great. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. I do have one more question, and maybe we can look to wrap. And so I imagine there was like seismic considerations for both projects taken into consideration. Could you elaborate a little bit? Was there any sort of seismic or site-specific type seismic done for completed for the projects? Maybe Jessica, your thoughts?
Yeah, so for the levee, per the core guidelines, we typically don't consider earthquake loading for the levee stability because the low probability of the earthquakes coinciding with flood events. And so we are looking at, for the levee, we did look at susceptibility to issues due to liquefaction. So we ran liquefaction analyses for our exploration locations along the levee alignment. And so that was kind of the more seismic specific piece of this project. Looking at a couple of return periods and looking at the likelihood of liquefaction susceptibility and then therefore liquefaction-induced settlement, which we did, see potential for some liquefaction-induced settlement after a seismic event. And the recommendation is, observation, going out and taking a look at the levee afterwards. Because it could reduce your level of protection if you have settlement, if you have stability issues, or even just cracking of the pavement up top, things like that. So that was kind of the focus on the levee side of things, looking at the liquefaction.
Great. Kyle, you have any comments maybe before we wrap up on maybe seismic considerations you would have thought? I assume absolutely, especially with the rail construction, but any other thoughts?
Yeah, similarly, we looked at liquefaction susceptibility from just purely a geotechnical standpoint, pile down drag and embankment stability and the like. But interestingly, the Meadowdale project was, the rail bridge was designed to meet the ARIMA guidelines. Some of the features inside of the park were subject to international building code. So we had different codes and different seismic design events and requirements that we had to kind of tailor to for each structure. So it was a bit broader in that sense. I had to look at a number of different ground motions and things, but generally speaking, certainly we went through the seismic process. There were no major seismic considerations or concerns there. We didn't have to do any ground improvement or anything of that type, sadly. But yeah, we did definitely look at the seismic considerations.
Great. Well, these were both pretty significant and impressive projects, especially something that I don't see in my day-to-day career. So that's for sure. It was great to listen in and see what you've put forward. And thank you to help put together this sneak peek. With no other questions, I will turn it over to you, Brad. Thank you again, Tyler and Jessica.
That was awesome, guys. Fantastic. A great presentation, and I hope that this spurs everybody to want to go up to the Pacific Northwest for ASCE convention this year. I really am fascinated by it. I mean, everything is so different. So the flooding thing, that was me, right? But I didn't think about, I mean, the flooding that we have down here, it's flash flooding. We'll get a massive rainstorm. We'll get 4 inches of rain in an hour. Everything floods. And then within 6 hours, it's kind of back to normal, right? I think the issues that you guys are dealing with are probably a little bit different than what we have down here, and probably creates a different degree of scour, I would guess. I don't know. Do you guys have any more thoughts on either one on that?
Scour is it's site specific. That's the hydraulics folks do that analysis. I know nothing of what goes into it or anything else, but there are specific guidelines about it has to be done. And per I think WashDOT has and AASHTO have kind of the most clear guideline that any permanent structure has to be a minimum of 2 feet below maximum scour depth for long-term stability considerations. So certainly the hydraulics of the system, current and post-construction hydraulics are a key consideration in all of the adjacent features design.
Thanks for that. Usually I don't ask any questions, so sorry about that. For all of our viewers, thanks for joining us today. And again, you can find all the information you need and probably even more than you need at convention.asce.org. You can find out everything that's going to happen in Seattle, sessions, keynote speakers, things that you might want to do during your trip to that part of the country. So Jessica, Tyler, thanks again for doing this today. Art, great job moderating. We really appreciate it. We will have our third ASCE convention live stream on a date to be announced at the end of August. It's going to be another great Seattle region case history, so you'll want to come back for that. We'll be opening registration very soon. And again, take time to click like, subscribe, and get notifications, and we will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel. Our producer today was Amber Davis. Fantastic job, and we will see everybody really soon with another ASCE live stream.